Ms. Pivette, I just want to thank you for your words and grounding us today. We couldn't have asked for a better opening. That really just reminds us why we're here. For us, Communities First recognizes that Indigenous people have different relationships, recognition, and exclusion from the United States, including the fact that many tribal nations have a nation-to-nation relationship with the U.S. That said, the voices and knowledge of Indigenous communities are essential to the generational infrastructure shift that will be happening in the U.S. context as a result of the recent passage of U.S. federal legislative tools and budgets designed to make investments in Black, Indigenous, and people of color and environmental justice communities, of which many of the Indigenous governed lands are part of and sovereign. Members of the Indigenous communities can be supported by and benefit from these investments through their own government and/or organizations, or through direct pay initiatives designed directly for communities. We're in the process of finding an Indigenous convener for Indigenous-specific spaces, but in this moment, we welcome all who are here. Thank you. I also just want to ground for us the land acknowledgement, and I appreciate Ms. Vivette really also speaking to both the cultural and the grounding that is necessary when we have these moments in spaces like this. For us, a land acknowledgement recognizes that Native traditions and inhabitants of place offers a counter narrative to the discovery doctrine and raises awareness about the history of the land and the people who operate in and around it. We often come into these spaces talking about a community as though communities and people did not exist long before our arrival. We often have place-based, place-keeping conversations that fail to acknowledge those who have been doing the history of this work long before we moved into space. And so we are so humbled to really have this next conversation and what it really means to meet this moment. My name is Stephanie Jenkins. I'm the Vice President of Strategies for Communities First, and it is an honor to welcome you all here. My heart is full as I look at almost every chair and every table full. This is the third convening that we have hosted in the last 4 weeks. We've been in New England, we've been in the Midwest, but we knew that we couldn't end this stop without being in the South. I thank all of you for traveling with 2 weeks' notice, leaving your family, and creating space to really have this conversation over the next 2 days. We have folks from Alabama. Okay. We've got folks from Mississippi. We've got folks from Georgia. We got some folks from Florida, Tennessee, Kentucky, South Carolina, and North Carolina. We want to thank all of our sponsors who helped to make today happen in the next 2 days. And I'm going to quickly ground what the agenda will be over the next 2 days and why you're in the room. We were very intentional in wanting to really share this invite with the influencers of the influencers. And if you are here, please know that there are folks in your community, in your network, in your spaces that you have been doing work who felt that you were the one who needed to be in this space to collect the wisdom, the knowledge, the cards, the access, the connections to go back, to mobilize and organize, So over these next 2 days, our commitment to you is that not only will you have a better understanding of the federal funding that is flowing to each of your states and communities, but that you will be able to hopefully navigate others to really understand what we are talking about when we discuss what it means to meet this moment. I want to thank the North Carolina Black Alliance, the North Carolina Climate Justice Collective, Partnership for Southern Equity, the Hive Fund, Democracy Green, SEND, the Southeast Clean Energy Network, and the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation. Because in many ways, Communities First is a national entity, and we are not going to exist by 2026. And it is intentional. Because if we do our work right, not only will you have access to the resources necessary to mobilize for action, but that the power and the civic infrastructure that is necessary to meet this moment will be built out. And it's with everyone in this room today. So we thank you for the journey that we're about to embark on. We're going to open up with an opening plenary with Christopher Coes and Matt Tejada, who I'll ask to come on stage right now. I will have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the resources that we're going to be talking about over the next 2 days, $4 trillion to be explicit. And it's my hope that you'll be able to explain the Biden billions that are coming to your state. Please come on stage. We will have a networking break, and it's really an opportunity to organize by just sector, because many of you all have not connected in a lot of ways, and really think about how we really mobilize for action. We also recognize the importance of really thinking about the collaboration that will be necessary, and we've got some folks who have been doing this work for years before there were trillions of dollars to talk about, starting to really think about how we do this more intentionally. We've got 6 federal agencies, all of which are the influencers of this funding and have the majority of the money that we're going to be talking about in this room and over the next 2 days to help you to understand a little bit more. You'll have not only office hours, but also connect with intermediaries who are really thinking about what regional coordination and transformation looks like. Tomorrow, we'll have an opportunity to really start to hear from community folks who are really leading at this work. We'll have folks from the White House as we are on the eve of the 2-year anniversary of the bipartisan infrastructure law, talk about the money and the resources that are going to be made available, breakout sessions to really support the implementation, because it is our hope that not only will we talk about what needs to happen, but that you will be able to hopefully figure out how you can implement some of these resources as part of it. Hear more from the additional agencies that we have with some breakout sessions. We know that we're in the South, and so maybe building with your state is not going to be a real reality. So in the afternoon, we're going to have a conversation around how do we actually support and what does the roadmap for transformation look like for the South? And then we will close out and really thinking about what transformational change looks like. It's our commitment, and I hope that by the end of both today and tomorrow, you will be able to tell me what you now are able to do because of the resources that have been shared and the knowledge that has been exchanged. With that, I just want to thank you again for your time and what we're about to build together. Thank you very much. All right. So we decided that we were going to kick off this conversation in terms of meeting this moment with both Christopher Coes and Matt Tejada, in part because they both serve as co-chairs of the Thriving Communities Federal Interagency Network. This is the network that brings together both the Department of Transportation, the Environmental Protection Administration, USDA, HUD, GSA, the Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration, EDA, the Department of Energy, in addition to FEMA. and
HHS.
Oh, y'all just added a new partner. Okay. Collectively, they've got several trillions of dollars that they are helping to manage. But more importantly, something that I was sitting with as I was reflecting on this last year and last 2 years, there was a question about what did not exist 2 years ago before we started doing this work. And in many ways, one of those included the Thriving Communities Network. It's really exciting when I think about what has happened over the last 18 months and what you all have collectively helped to execute. On this stage, you have both a career civil servant who has been doing this work through the Trump administration, someone who has gone into government and really tried to push for systems change in a different way, and is now managing several billions of dollars that will be explicitly going to community-based organizations. But more importantly, one of the major programs that will be announced in the next couple of weeks is a grant makers program. And one of the reasons why we said we have to organize before the government potential shutdown at the end of this week and bring you all in the room to really understand the resources that are getting ready to be unlocked in your region. EPA, and particularly the Environmental Justice Program, has several programs that they're leading, but one of them is a grant makers program, which will be a $50 million investment just in this region alone for community-based organizations. And it is a co-governing grant. I'm sorry. Right. The federal government is talking about co-governance around $50 million, and that's just for this region. There is going to be $50 million in the 10 EPA regions and an additional $50 million nationally, $550 million being made available for community-based organizations. That is why we're in this room today. But that's actually not the biggest program.
It's not.
Later on this afternoon, we're going to hear from folks on his staff that are getting ready to announce a $2 billion community change grant that will offer $10 million to community-based organizations to build out those community plans that we've had on shelves, that we've been organizing around, that we've been talking about for decades. And I'm not sure if we're ready.
Y'all ready?
Oh, y'all ready?
I didn't hear ready.
I ain't here ready.
We need to hear ready.
So a portion of this conversation is to really unpack both the resources that are flowing through, but let me be very clear. We are here right now because of Christopher Coes. Because
Not true.
earlier this spring, Christopher was like, hey, I hear you in terms of what needs to happen, but we're gonna probably need to go outside of Washington to have this conversation. And so what we need are some regional conversations that bring the feds and philanthropy and community-based organizations together in the room with state and local, because 90% of this money is really going to the states, to have a different conversation about how we meet this moment. And I was like, that sounds great, Christopher. Who's going to do that? And so I'm going to just offer the space. I just wanted y'all to understand why we are in the room, okay? And allow you to hear from those who are helping to lead this work and really thinking about how we mobilize for action. The Thriving Communities Network offers a different paradigm shift than even what I saw 10 years ago when I was in government. Because what we typically organized around was a project, not a place. And something that Communities First holds is that community doesn't work around single issue matters, because we don't have single issue lives. Today we might be dealing with healthcare, tomorrow it might be energy, affordability burdens are real, and so the intersection of the conversation is what is necessary. But that is not how government is, because there are silos. And so the network was really saying, what does it look like for us to really lead with different values and being able to meet this moment? These are the folks who are leading this work in the federal government. And I thought before we even go anywhere else, because I don't know about you, but government has said a lot of things. But in this moment under the Biden-Harris administration, there's a different commitment around how we take collective action. And I wanted to give the space for them to talk about that here. Thank you. Matt, can you talk more?
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you all for being here. This is a beautiful room. I see a lot of beautiful faces, and thank you so much for the grounding that we had just to get into this space. This, to me, is a really historic time we're in, that we're all living in. And I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a scientist. Most of the people at EPA have no idea how I got my job. Actually, I'm actually a historian of all things. So I would say, as a historian, we're living through an incredibly historic time right now. Right? We have an administration that is supporting equity and justice in a way that no administration ever has before. Right? It's been 30 years since we had a president sign an executive order on environmental justice back in 1994, and he didn't have another one do it until this one, and he signed like 12 of them. Like, they are all over the place. Things like Justice 40, things like the Climate Economic Justice Screening Tool, racial equity. We have two executive orders that call racial equity. They didn't even use a euphemism. They just said racial equity, right? We have all of this leadership out there. Congress has passed these two appropriations, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, that either alone would have been the biggest investment that has ever happened in our lifetimes. We have that happening at a time when we got people like Christopher Coes that came in to this administration across the board, agency by agency, to those of us who had been dying inside of the agencies for years, providing leadership from across the federal government. And the biggest thing is our society is having a conversation that isn't had in a couple generations. People are talking about the histories of our communities. People are talking about not just marginalization and not just disinvestment, but oppression, but about genocide, and how those things didn't just get fixed in 1964. They still affect all of our communities across the United States today. All of these things are happening at the same time, which is historic. It also sucks, because the timing of none of this works. Right? We started talking about the Thriving Community Network before the Inflation Reduction Act was even a thing, right? Because we were all excited about the Build Back Better thing that had all this money for other stuff, and then that got cut in half, and all the stuff we were excited about wound up on the floor. And we're like, well, snap, right? How are we going to do this? And that was really the genesis of the Thriving Community Network. We said, well, we got to figure it out with what we got, right? There's no excuses. There's still all this money out there from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that has got to go to the communities that need it and deserve it the most, but they're not ready. They need support, they need relationship building, they need planning help, they need connections to those money. And that is what the Thriving Community Network has been trying to establish, as well as, for the first time, really taking away, doing the really unsexy work inside of the government to figure our own mess out instead of putting that burden on y'all. Right? I'm I'm a very successful failed applicant to the grants I now administer, and never got a single one. I applied many, many times to government grants when I used to do EJ work down in Houston. Never got a grant out of my own program. I know how hard it is. That's what the Thriving Community Network is trying to do, so that we're not out there just developing assets to support y'all, all by themselves, but actually trying to figure out the mess of government so y'all don't have to, so it works a little bit better. Right? So when y'all need resources, we have the resources lined up in ways to make those connections with and for you, right? To actually find the programs that match the needs of your community. And if they don't match the needs, then to design programs that will. And thank you, Stephanie, for talking about things like the Grant Maker program, right? Because we know folks need a couple $100,000 to get going, but you can't come to the government to get it because we make it really impossible for you to do that. Right? So we're going to put, it's not actually 550, it's going to be 600. I've seen the list. It's going to be about 600 million across the United States with some really exciting partners, right? Folks that are already working within and for your communities are going to be the ones that help redistribute that money to thousands of communities across the United States. And you won't have to come to the government to get it. You just go to them. You go to folks you know. You go to folks you trust. You do a process that actually makes sense to communities, right? We've got the Tic Tacs out there already, the Thriving Community Technical Assistance Centers. Some are in the room, right? Some of them, like I keep visiting with them, their eyes are this big. It's like, oh my gosh, we are doing so much work and there is such a demand out there for that basic support, right? That foundational level of technical assistance for folks to get in the game, right? To start making those connections to your local government, to your tribal government, to your utility, to your academic institution, for those partners that you need to show up in authentic ways to actually help you build those plans that can start unlocking all of those billions and billions and billions of dollars. And that's the other thing we're going to put out in a couple weeks is that grant that Stephanie mentioned, $10 to $20 million. To me, that's the no excuses grant. Because we're going to fund hundreds of communities with that money. And that money, if it does anything, it should make those communities, put them in a place where nobody else has any excuse not to give them the money they deserve. Because we know as much as we organize, as much as we develop, as much as we plan, somebody always pops and says, well, you need $1 million for that, and you need $2.5 million for that, and if you just own that piece over there, like we could figure all this out, but I'm sorry, just not going to work. No excuses, right? We're going to fund those projects that pull together dealing with pollution, dealing with health, dealing with economic prosperity, dealing with climate change. So nobody, not my agency, not Chris's agency, nobody has any excuses to say, well, you don't deserve that $100 million that you've been denied for several generations. It's actually going to fix the things that were foisted upon your communities for many generations. So this is going to be a no excuses grant to actually start making the change happen on the ground, but it is not going to fix everything, right? It is not enough to fix everything. It's not even a down payment. And that's where we need y'all to show up. Because to me, this is earnest money. You know, when you buy something, you got to put that little bit down to show you're serious. The money we're going to put out in EJ is earnest money. And we need y'all to make it pay. We need y'all to show everyone in government, everyone in the executive branch, everyone in Congress, everyone in your state capitals, and in your city halls, that not only is this a good way of using taxpayer dollars, this is the best way of using taxpayer dollars to support communities, to come up with the solutions that work for their communities and solve those issues that have been there for a couple hundred years in some cases that nobody's been able to figure out because they haven't supported y'all to do it. So we're going to support y'all to do it, but we need you to show up. And I know you're ready, but we need you to show up to do that.
Wow. Amen. So my heart is filled right now. Not only because normally Matt would say, I hate going after Christopher, but I am now saying I hate going after Matt. But also to the work that both Stephanie and Helen and the entire Communities First and all of the partners at philanthropy. As you mentioned, this is the third or fourth convening, and each time it is a packed room with the folks who are not only in the front lines, but are actually holding this country together. And first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to all of you. because it is also a moment of grounding for me, having lived in this region in Southwest Georgia for my young life, and then before going off to college, recognizing what it means to come back home. And some of us, we had the opportunity to go to Waffle House just a few months before coming here for breakfast, and we're realizing that you can't actually walk to it, even though it's less than a half a mile away, or how folks have to still struggle to get to everyday services in a what we would define as a prosperous region, right? It kind of reminds us while we're sitting here eating how much more work we have to do. But again, what makes this moment humbling, but more importantly, affirmation, confirmation that this is the right thing that we are doing, is because as a colleague once said, when you really take a step back, and it's very rare that us politicals who do this work every single day get to have a moment to take a step back, and I'm taking that right now, so apologies, I'm reacting in real time. But what I'm seeing right now is literally decades of seeds planted where fruits are blooming. And what I mean by that is this conversation that we're having today happened 10 years ago, happened during the pandemic, happened during the economic crisis, and it happened before that. But actually, in many ways, if we were very honest, there are faces and organizations that are no longer with us that we might have came out of that actually held the line, right? And where I sit right now in the administration, in my capacity, I get to work not only with the secretary, but with the White House to help design the infrastructure package, but now implement it. And what I remember in the rooms when it was like, why do we need to have a program designed to remove infrastructure that might have cut off Black or brown neighborhoods, created railroads through neighborhoods, right, that created air pollution? I would use stories of my ancestors, of me growing up in Southwest Georgia, right? And many of the work that all of you and your organizations were doing long before I actually got to that seat today, to make that argument and make that business case with so many of you. And so I want to make sure folks are, not only this is a historic moment, but I actually think in rejuvenating cycles. We are in one. And the fruits that are being produced right now are being produced by those who came before us. So I think we should honor that, this moment, and recognize we have a huge responsibility to take the fruits of today and take those nice little seeds that's in the fruit and put it in the ground so that 10 years from now, someone's going to look who may not look like you, who might be even younger than you, right, with a whole nother organization asking for philanthropy to fund them to do and keep this work going. So I want to put that there. But there's two things I want to emphasize here. One of the things that really makes the Thriving Communities Network, but this moment that we're in, so impactful, is that a number of agencies are recognizing we have our superpowers. Our colleagues in EPA is pumping the pipeline, building the capacity. At the Department of Transportation, with the $660 billion, we are trying to fund that pipeline. And one of the things that's been so remarkable over the last 2 years, since the inception of this bipartisan infrastructure law, we, as Matt pointed out, we, along with our sister agencies, are committed to the President's Justice 40 goals. Now, I know my colleague to my right believes in Justice 100. I'll leave that there. I agree with it too. But right now, the President says Justice 40. Before coming on stage, I had the team take a look at all of we have 40 programs totaling over $200 billion. This is excluding formula dollars, just in discretionary, that are within our Justice 40 program. And I asked them, of all the programs that we've launched out so far, how much, just give me a percentage, give me just a percentage, how much of these dollars are actually not only going into, quote, disadvantaged communities based on the CEQC just, okay, that's one metric. But how many of these actually had community voices in them, embedded in them? And the number came to me over 55 to 60%. And I'm asking myself, wait a minute, we're supposed to start at 40. But right now, as just with a half of our programs, we're seeing that we are going from 55 to 60%. And actually, I will even say in the RAISE grant, which is, I know, a very popular program that a lot of localities try to apply to, formerly known as BILL, formerly known as Tiger, we got up to 75% in terms of rural and historic disadvantaged communities. But what was most poignant about that statistic was that in most of those applications, they had said something along the lines of, we had to go talk to somebody in that community. Or we haven't talked to them a long time, but we're having new public meaningful engagement strategy that's going to get them into the project design. Or, and I will say I just got off a deputy's call about this on wealth creation. You know what? We're actually going to commit and exceed our DBE goals. And we were going to help create more pathways to economic opportunities with these funds. While I'm highlighting that is that while we're doing the hard work of building capacity in communities, while we're doing the hard work to bind our visions together into real projects, the real work is being done right now. And what is most important to me at this stage, I'm excited for the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of EPA is putting out to make sure you have capacity. But what I am most concerned about today is now with literally close to $200 billion on the street, mostly going to disadvantaged communities who have been left behind, underserved, I need these projects to happen. Because if we are going to make the commitment to enjoying these fruits of previous generations' labor, it also means that we have to do the hard work to make these projects actually happen and actually have the benefit to our communities, because the door could open again for us as the Department of Transportation. We have a reauthorization that comes up in less than 2 years from now. And America, Capitol Hill, and probably whoever the next president at the time, I would like to think that, hopefully my boss right now would be that person, but without politics. But it has to be, without question, the way that we've administered, but the way you have showed up in these communities, that these projects shows without a shadow of a doubt that this is how you should make infrastructure investments in America. That has a clear roadmap, not just putting a dollar in a community, but actually removing the very harm that made that community disadvantaged, where no one has to live in a disadvantaged community in America again. And that is the challenge and call to action I put to all of you. And with that being said, I want to have some real talk. There is this mood of urgency. Oh, I didn't hear about that. I'm too late for the grant application. I'm too small. It's okay. It's all right. You didn't get the last round. Trust me, you'll be okay. Get in line. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I also think it's important for us not to submit bad applications, for you to make bad decisions about your organizations, putting you in financial difficulties that you may not be ready in. Get the work, get the capacity, but also most importantly, if you're not ready, may say a 4-letter word, partner with someone else. That's right. Because one of the challenges I am seeing today is that you, as individual organizations, are trying to do the work by yourself. You can't do it. It's showing up in applications. I had to say, you don't even have a checking account. You don't have your proper papers in order. But for those of you who are being smart, and you say, you know what, let me go and ask my best friend who has this other organization down the street, let's connect, let's actually sit down with the city, let them know that we're here. When you partner, guess what? That is a sustainable pathway, not only for the moment that's being created today, but I can guarantee you, when you need to talk to your states, who are sitting on 80% of the federal funding, and we are telling them, who are you working with in the community? You're like, well, one organization, they don't have the capacity. But when we're working with the consortium, plus with local government, they don't have an excuse anymore. And so I just really want to stress that. Please partner. Now, the last thing I'll emphasize, because I think we're getting the Stephanie eye here, and that is, and Stephanie said this in her intro, that you are the influencers of the influencers. I think it is so important right now for you to remind people why this is important. It should not be without surprise that you have folks like Matt, who actually I worked with long before coming into the administration, a lot of his colleagues at EPA. The issue here is like you forget that like there's a lot of things that's happening every day that distract us. So I want to just remind you, like, it's important to remind people that, you know what, this community has historical pollution. People are still dying on our roadways. And actually how this works, because turns out it's not promised. And turns out if you are not your best champions, not to me, because I see your letters, you see your applications, you may go to Matt and say, hey, what are you doing? But there's a lot more people, i.e. Capitol Hill, who need to know why this matters. And I'll give an example. While we are all assembling, for us as a Department of Transportation, we just, back in FY22, through the great leadership of Maria Zimmerman, Sharice Taylor, through our Thriving Communities Initiative, we awarded 64 communities over $25 million as part of our Thriving Communities, where we were giving you whole of service, from consultants to the government, to say, we're gonna help you get your community right. And then we found out in our FY24 budget discussions that no one wanted to fund it. And I asked a question. I was like, well, why was that? And you know what they said to me on Capitol Hill? No one told me. No one told me it was important. You can't rely on people who sit in these seats. You can't rely on the community first, forever. You have to take ownership of this moment. And it can't just be today because there's hundreds of millions of dollars. It has to be a consistent drive. So with that, I hope both Matt and I have gotten you excited, but I also had some real talk with you that the work, the toil in these soils, as someone said, we all came from the dirt. But I grew up where you had to actually go in the garden and roll up your sleeves. This is the moment for us to plant the next generation. And again, I'm just thoroughly excited to be here, be in space. And I know Matt and I will be definitely here to answer any question as well as our staff. So again, Godspeed. We look forward to seeing all the great work you're going to do.
I won't be. I'm going to the airport in 5 minutes, literally. But there's a lot of EPA staff here.
Yes.
They're the ones that actually do the work. Then they tell me what to say. There's lots of EPA staff here.
Yeah, DOT, raise your hand too.
Please, please. These are the folks
There you
that
go.
y'all need to connect with. These are the folks you need to build relationship with. We got regional staff here. We got headquarters staff here. And I just want to lift up two things real quick from what Christopher said. You got to partner. You got to partner. You have got to partner. But I know that so often y'all have wanted to partner from our communities, and folks ask you for a letter of support, and then when the check comes in, suddenly you're not invited to the room anymore.
Yes.
I know. Happened to me a lot of times too. Our grants that come out in a couple weeks, for the first time, it's going to be the city coming to y'all. All right? The community gets to call the shot if that $20 million grant even gets submitted.
Yep.
All right? The community, we're changing that power dynamic. That's going to be a powerful change.
Yep.
That needs to happen for all these other hundreds of millions and billions of other dollars out there. Most importantly, because we want to fix communities. We don't want there to be disadvantaged communities anymore. But another thing we all know, I know you all know it in this room, is the fact that our communities aren't fixed is one of the only reasons we still get to live in our communities. And as soon as we fix them, we don't want to fix them for us. We want to fix them for the generation a couple lines down, right? For our grandkids' generation, so they can still live in our communities after we fixed them. But that means y'all got to be the ones that make it happen. Y'all got to be in control. We're doing everything we can to support you in that. But that's, again, why those relationships and those partnerships are so critical. So that we're not fixing stuff just for somebody else to come in here and enjoy it. But we're fixing it for y'all, and we're fixing it for the folks that are going to come after y'all in your communities.
Amen.
Thank you. With that, I will thank both Matt one more time and Christopher for their leadership. And we are hoping that Matt can make this flight He came in just for y'all, but we thought it was critical that you all heard from them first. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Good luck.